This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rapin. Joining me this week, two mythological creatures from deep within the old forests, Kate Scotchless.
Heyo.
And Nick White.
It's me, Bigfoot. Come find me in the woods. I'm here.
This week, we are talking about some very questionable things. I know last week's episode I said, hey, I want to talk about Appalachian horror, and that's kind of what we're going to do for at least a little bit today. But before we get into that, I have an announcement. I did make some changes on our Patreon, which for those of you who maybe haven't seen this, maybe you should go check out patreon.com/IRCB podcast. We changed up some of our goals. So usually for various Patreon accounts, you have like these things where a certain number of people subscribe, or certain people are patrons, or a certain amount of dollars, you're trying to reach. I changed things up to be a little bit more, I guess, interesting. So now our Patreon goals, which were originally like we're going to do a sideshow and everything was really ephemeral, now we have a distinct path towards insane things that we could potentially unlock once we get to a certain number of patrons. And our goals sit at, for 75 patrons, we're going to do an IRCB tabletop RPG miniseries or maxi series or something. It could be the Die RPG, it could be the Aliens RPG, it could be Dungeons and Dragons, it could be Pathfinder, anything. As soon as we get to 75 patrons, we're going to get the wheels running on that. I'm very excited. Right now we're at 33 patrons, so this is a pretty lofty goal, but I think it's achievable, and I'm reaching out to all of you listening. Just go join that Patreon. Get access to all the amazing stuff we've got over there. We've got this brand new series that we just started recording called a new Batmobile, better Batmobile, geez, oh Pete's, that Paul is running up. It's going to be covering all of Grant Morrison's run on the infamous Batman series that they worked on. It's really, really exciting. Paul and I recorded the first episode yesterday. It's awesome. Plus, we've got the Giant Days of Our Lives series, which is all about Giant Days of the series. So if you've ever read that, you definitely want to go check out that series that Kara, Brian, and Kate did. We've got Paul and Mike read Doom Patrol. We've got Book versus Book, one of our early series. You've got Saga of Saga. If you're just catching up on Saga, we did an issue by issue, arc by arc breakdown of every single issue of Saga. It was an unbelievable thing, and I can't believe that we did it. So go check all that out. Go listen to the IRCB Movie Club, where it's me, Brian, and Paul talking about comic book movies that you get to vote on if you're a patron. So many different things you can unlock there. So patreon.com/IRCB podcast. The other thing that we have that I'm aiming for is once we hit 150 patrons, this is like pie in the sky, who knows if this is ever going to happen kind of thing, we will debut a semi-regular I Hate Comic Books podcast, where we're going to be talking about all of the things that are bad or we dislike or our problems in the comic book world, and just kind of going in maybe with a couple of beers in our stomachs. We'll see. But if we hit 150 patrons, we're going to try that out and see how it goes. Maybe that will change to something else. But anyways, big changes. We're really hoping for some huge things happening this year, and you can go help by going to patreon.com/IRCB podcast. Get on that subscriber list and you can get access to all that stuff.
Also, if we hit 200 subscribers, we'll release grainy photos of Nick in the woods.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, so I wanted to just let everybody know that's happening. If you're a patron, you've probably seen some of the stuff, and I've been making announcements in our schedule updates that we do. But this thing just happened over this past weekend, and I wanted to make sure everybody knew. So enough with selling our own stuff. Let's talk about comic books. Let's talk about all the amazing things that we've been reading and how we've been. So I've got two legally mandated questions I have to ask, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Nick.
Sure. I do have one quick question about the housekeeping, though, briefly.
Sure.
I know that some of those numbers you said, they seem lofty, they seem out of reach, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing stopping people from creating a new email address and creating another Patreon subscription and just subscribing multiple times to the Patreon.
This is true. We encourage that, actually. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to be. I mean, I'm not going to do that, but there's probably other people out there who will. Super fans or what they're called. So yeah, super fans, get on that. Yeah. I mean, West Michigan Weather Watch yesterday. It was literally 60 degrees. And the snow was melting, and it seemed like a perfect day to go outside because that's what everybody else thought. And I said, nope, too many people. I want to be out there when it's cold and frigid and it's just me walking along the lakeshore in solitude and just meditating on the water, and then just having someone roll some B camera footage in there of me just thinking about it.
We had crazy high winds last night here.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So, I mean, beyond that, I read Alien number 10 this week, and I think after that, I just I don't feel pain anymore. I'm just oh
That
man,
good, huh?
like someone should just
Are you cured
take
or
me.
numb?
I've become so numb, I can't feel you there.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know if that was
All
a
right.
setup, but you definitely put the ball on the tee, and I just knocked it out of the park.
It's true.
This book was definitely me, and I think I'm just going to take up smoking, because it would have just been me every 5 minutes just going, oh, fuck. Look, this book is by Philip Kennedy Johnson, written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, art by Salvador Larroca, colors by Guru EFX, letters by Clayton Coles. We're now 4 issues into this 6-issue arc, the second arc, called Revival. It largely surrounds this religious organization called the Spinners, which, much like many contemporary religious groups, have sort of decided they're not going to deal with modern technology and set themselves apart as their own society. And they broker this deal with the United Americas, and basically the United Americas says, hey, if you terraform this moon for us, which we sort of need as a midpoint colony, then we'll just give you the moon once you're done terraforming it. And the beginning of the book starts with them finishing the terraforming process, and they're like, oh, I'm so great to not have to deal with gross technology anymore. And they turn down the machines, and they're like, fuck computers.
Wow.
And then a visitor shows up, and you get one guess. We all know what that is. And it starts killing people, and you learn that xenomorph attacks are non-denominational.
Well,
Very
that's
equal
good, I
opportunity of them.
Yeah.
So, God, the arc's dragged on for too long, and Larroca, whose art was kind of all over the place in the first arc, doesn't really benefit from the fact that with this arc taking place sort of a lot of it in the middle of the day outside, you can't really cover the characters' faces in shadows or dimly lit corridors, and so everything's just there to be seen. And just the uncanny valley just runs rampant at that point. And thankfully, we're at a point in the story where, minor spoilers, bad decision making is starting to really escalate to the point where it's like, I want to go into the cave. And so I'm like, oh, thank God I don't have to look at your faces again. So maybe the next 2 issues will turn around as it starts killing everyone, and I don't have to look at the people anymore. So yeah, comics are good, and so are you. Yeah. Did read a few other things. I will briefly mention this book. I know, Mike, I think you read this as well. Radio Spaceman #1, written by Mike Mignola, art by Greg Hinkle, colors by Dave Stewart, letters by Clem Robbins. I think Dave and Clem have brokered some insane deal with Mike, because they never get to leave. They're just stuck. I've really, really, really enjoyed this book. I was looking forward to this book for a really long time, which is generally not a good sentence. Usually things go downhill from there, but really, really enjoyed this book. I think it's perfect when we talk about, this is a perfect comic book for people who don't read comics. This is a perfect jumping on point for people that don't want to deal with a overarching canon or massive world building, or people throw around perfect jumping on point so much these days that it just means nothing. You just go, okay, fine. But this book just really just kicks off with this. You've got this guy, you're dropping off this guy who goes to this planet. He literally jumps in a rocket and flies off, and yeah, that's really it. It's just about a floating skull and a helmet attached to a spacesuit that blasts off in a rocket on a rescue mission to a faraway planet. For some reason, I thought Mignola was going to write and draw this, which is borderline rarity for Mignola. I don't know why I thought that. Like, he always does the covers to the books he writes, so I don't know why when I looked at Radio Spaceman, I went, it's all Mignola, and he never does this, which is, not totally true. He drew the final issue of Witchfinder last year, Archeron, Acheron, end to end. That was probably the first time he'd done that since maybe, I want to say Hellboy in Hell, which was like a while. Anyway, so it was a big deal, and I was kind of disappointed when I was like, well, who the hell is Greg Hinkle, and who does he think he is?
Okay. All right, Nick, tell us how you really feel.
I did. I was kind of like, well, who is this guy? I've never even heard this name.
Yeah.
The dude is real. The dude is legit.
Yeah.
I remember maybe reading the first issue of his Airboy series from Image like 6 years ago, and it was okay.
Yeah, I mean, that book got really problematic in the end, so it's probably best that you didn't finish it.
Okay, I heard it went to some interesting, not great places. But honestly, great art. Absolutely loved it. If this guy wants to continue to work in comics, and I don't blame him if maybe he doesn't, given some things that go on, this guy should definitely be getting more work. Fantastic.
He did a Black Cloud series from Image for a little bit. I think that ran for 12 issues. I read a couple of issues of that. His art's pretty good. I think he's solid. Having read this book, I kind of don't know why it's 2 issues. I don't know why it's more than just a one-shot or like an oversized one-shot or something, because I'm pretty sure this was like 22 or 24 pages long. Yeah, I don't know. This book was weird because it's like cool, a little weird thing that like feels like a comic you would pick up in 1976 at a 7-Eleven. That's just like crazy thing happens in space, and there's like this thing and that thing and blah blah. I don't want to spoil it for anyone that wants to read this bizarre out there comic, but I like it. But it's also like, did it need to be 2 issues? I'm very uncertain as to why that happened. That's my biggest gripe with the whole book.
Yeah, and I really love the fact that Mike Mignola is just very bluntly honest about the fact that this book literally spun out of, for those who remember, he was doing a bunch of sort of pandemic sketches for charity back in 2020. And he drew this character once or twice, and the reception was really, really positive. And so he drew the character a couple more times and then said, well, what the heck, let's do something with this. And I love this. In an interview with Polygon, he said, well, Radio Spaceman is almost nothing as a character. He's a good visual, but he's basically just a puppet. Does he have a personality? I'm not sure. He's only shown a trace of personality in the first issue, and I don't know if that will develop more in the second issue. He goes on to say, the character can't talk, so it's a visual-oriented book. It's like an escalating situation of dropping a guy to a planet, and then there's this incident that leads to this thing, which leads to this bigger thing, and it culminates in basically a gigantic explosion. I actually don't know. I actually don't think that it has an explosion, but it probably has explosions. I can't remember.
So Mike's really paid attention to his own work.
The honesty is refreshing.
He's
true.
I mean, later in the interview, he's like, I've been feeling bad about some of the other books that have me with story writing credits, because he's like, the other guy wrote 90%, and I basically had a phone call with him. And I'm like, you know what? Respect.
Yeah, you know what? Give Chris Roberson what he deserves, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, I definitely get that. And then just 5 seconds on these last 2 things. I read a lot. I always get this title wrong. A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance by Rick Remender and Andre Lima Arujo. I will never get this title right. I will never remember this title right. I always confuse it with David Eager's book, A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. Do not ask me why I do that, but I do. Sure. It's the fastest issue I've read this week. It's probably the fastest issue I've read in months. Honestly, I don't know where this book is going. It's great. And I read the first 3 issues of What's the Furthest Place from Here by Tyler Boss and Matthew Rosenberg. And it feels like Tyler Boss's calling card for all of his works, whether it's this or We Can Never Go Home, or 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank, is child endangerment. What is the deal? It's just child endangerment nonstop.
Sure. I mean, I can definitely see that. I do have a question about What's the Furthest Place from Here, if only to ask, how do you feel about the chapter markers?
Do you mean are you talking about the introductory page with the heads, or are you talking about how it's chooses to split up
all the scenes? Yeah, the thing that splits up all the scenes, where it's like chapter 9 and then it's a quote from something that someone's going to say in like half a page.
Yeah, I don't need that.
Okay. I just was curious. Well, interesting. I'm glad you read a lot of comics, Nick. It's good to hear. I appreciate it. I also
It was a
see that
nice
you
day,
read...
so I stayed inside.
Stayed inside, yeah. Well, Kate, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I have been better, but
Mm.
my doctor has been telling me I need to eat more salt, and so it's really nice hanging out with Nick, who is just nothing but salt these days. I think it's going to be really
So
helpful
mad.
for me. My favorite thing about the high salt diet is every time someone sees me doing it or taking my salt pills, telling me it won't that raise your blood pressure. So that's literally the point, my dude. But
Uh-huh.
so I've been better. I just moved back home and am on some new meds that I'm getting used to. So I've done a lot of hanging out on the couch, watching TV, and reading comics. And I read Once in Future Volume 2, Old English, about half of it, so probably issues 7 through 9,
Mm-hmm.
which is the book by Kieran Gillen and Dan Mora with colors by Tamara Bonvillain. So I read about half of it waiting before a medical test I had to do. And it was one of those situations when they're like, be here at this time. And then you find out that they told you to be there like 2 hours early for no fucking reason. And so I just sat there and read comics. And I will say I enjoyed this enough that it did make the time pass faster than it would have otherwise. I
Mm-hmm.
did not enjoy it enough that I then finished it when I got home, and then it was due at the library, so now I have to check it out again. So I'll get there. But I definitely didn't enjoy it as much as the first volume. The premise is basically like Grendel is out and about now, and the first half of the book at least seems like real just monster fight book, and a lot less about the whole premise of legends are real and they're in the other world and we can change them and they emerge and they affect the real world and this and that, right? Like that's what I found really cool. The first half of volume 2 is very much just like fight big monster,
Mm-hmm.
scary and bad, and run around, and which is a totally legit kind of comic. It just has never really been for me. So I'm hoping it
Gotcha.
gets kind of back into the original stuff. And luckily it's on Hoopla, so I can, pick it up to finish it anytime. But I also read 2 or 3 to try to think of the last week, but up through volume 9 of the Babysitter's Club graphic novels.
Nice.
Listen, sometimes you just need that warm glass of milk type comic.
Mm-hmm.
And they are delightful. They are not anywhere near as good as they were when Raina Telgemeier was doing them for the first, I think, 4. They have had several different people writing and drawing them at this point in the series, and I'm pretty sure the 10, 11, 12 also have someone new, but I'd have to go back and look. But they were
Mhm.
fun and easy and a good like bedtime chaser after watching and reading other stuff. My sister and I have been watching a lot of like true crime stuff in the evening, so it's nice to have the like really sweet friendship is magic kind of stuff afterwards. So you can, stop thinking about all the slain bodies you just listened to. So
What a tonal whiplash. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah. Everything works out in the end in middle grade books, and I think that's nice. So yeah, how about you, Mike?
I've been good. Trying to. I read a lot of comic books. Unfortunately, a lot of them were not very good, which is kind
Aw.
of the worst feeling in the world, to read like upwards of 12 or 15 single issue comics, and none of them were like, yeah, this is actually really solid.
Shit, was this your regular pull list, or were you trying new books?
Oh, this is all my regular pull list too.
No.
So yeah, so I've been busy just like figuring out. I mean, it's the time of the year for like taxes, and also trying to buy a house. So like I'm also doing all sorts of different phone calls with lawyers and tax people. Fucking being in your 30s is awful. Don't be married to someone who changed their job 3 times, and also you have to deal with changing jobs and yada yada yada. Because man, it makes everything complicated.
Yeah, I can just say years like that, it is super worth it to pay $200 to someone to do your taxes for you.
Kate, you read my mind, because
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm doing this year.
So
I'm
worth
like,
it.
I've got all these documents and I don't know what to do with them. I can pay you money to just
Yeah,
figure it out for
exactly.
me,
The
right?
one year I had 3 different jobs. I was just like, fuck it.
Yeah, dude. So complicated stuff on the really boring front, but I did spend a lot of time, like I said, working on the Patreon stuff. I've got a couple things coming down the line for that. Better Batmobile was recorded this past weekend, which is really, really cool. And yeah, I just got like the first sketch back from the artist that's doing the cover for that. And it looks incredible. I cannot wait to show it to everybody. We'll be posting it wherever we get it once it's finished up. But yeah, so I did read some comics that were actually good enough for me to talk about, because like I've been rating my books like for the past year, since I started this year. Nothing got really above a 3 that was worth it out of 5 in my list, but these 2 books, I at least want to talk about them. So I read Batman Gothic. This is Grant Morrison, Klaus Janson, is one of the books that we're reading for the first episode of A Better Batmobile. And all I can really say about this is, while I don't think that this is a perfect comic book, I do think this is probably one of the best Batman stories that I've ever read, in that it has everything that you would ever want out of a Batman story. It's got detective work, mysticism, violence, something about Batman's past come back to haunt him, Alfred making dinner, a bat ship. We've got the mob bosses of Gotham that are somehow intertwined with the mysticism of whatever weird, crazy thing that's happening in Batman's world. And the thing that I found the most interesting about this book is that Morrison writes Batman with such a fervor, such an anger in him, that he doesn't just want to stop crime. He hates crime so much that he is committing unbelievable violence towards those who are committing it in Gotham. There's an iconic page that I didn't realize was a thing until I talked to Paul about it, but there's a page where Batman says, Gotham downtown is hell, and I am the king of hell, and he's jumping down from this thing.
What?
It's just Batman saying, I am the king of hell. It's basically something I'm going to get tattooed on my back, like right across the entire back. It's really, really cool looking. So yeah, it's a really, really good book. If you haven't read this, I say give it a chance. Plus, if you're going to listen to the Better Batmobile series, you definitely got to read it. But yeah, for a book that came out in 1990, I was like, I don't really care that much for Klaus Janson's work overall, especially as a penciler. I think his inking work is incredible, but as a penciler,
Mike's about to make some friends.
Yeah. Like I said, I got a lot of thoughts. You can hear me talk all sorts of shit on this other podcast, but yeah, so on the whole, though, this book is great. And I think when Klaus Janson does things right, like, oh my gosh, it's some of the coolest looking art you've ever seen.
How many issues is collected in it?
This is a 4 or 5 issue arc. It's really, really short, and it's really good. Like, everything is super contrived and insane, but in all the right ways. Nothing feels out of place until you start to talk about it outside of the comic. And you're like, none of this actually is none of this is actually makes any sense. And then, but in the story, it totally does. So, highly recommend that if you're looking for like just a solid Batman book. And this is on Hoopla for the record, so you can check it out. The other book that I want to talk about really quick is One Piece 1041, chapter 1041. I haven't talked about One Piece in a while. I've been reading it. All I can say is I really liked this latest chapter. I know the new chapter came out today, I think, as of March 6th, but this last chapter that I read was 1041 by Ichiro Oda. And the thing that surprises me is that One Piece as a story, I'm not going to tell you everything you need to know about One Piece to get you up to date here, but One Piece is kind of known for having these really, really, really long chapters, or at least I think it is. This arc that has, or excuse me, not chapters, but arcs. This story arc that One Piece is on right now has been going on since 2018. So we are in one continuous storyline for like 120 plus chapters.
What?
And I think based on how 1041 ended, we may actually see the end of this story arc in 2022, and I'm very excited. The Wano country arc, it's big business with the Emperor of the Sea known as Kaido, for anyone who's reading. I think that we might see the end of it.
Date, Mike. All of us are all of us are up to date. You don't need to.
Good.
Please.
Okay, good. But yeah, I'm really excited that this might be the end of this arc, because I don't know, could One Piece be even closer to getting finished? There's so many things that haven't been touched. I don't know. I think the thing that really blows me away about this entire series is that really longtime readers deserve some respect, because if you were reading this week to week back in 2000, back in 2010, like you've been reading like only a handful of story arcs, right? And like I only came to One Piece in like 2020, right? And I started reading it and I got caught up at the beginning of 2021 when Chapter 1000 came out. But this single story arc having gone on for almost 4 years now is insane to me. I can't imagine doing this for 20 years. You know, it's absolutely crazy. Yeah. So I really like the recent chapter. Yeah, everything else is garbage. I gave an X-Men book.
Okay, wait.
X-Men number 9, I gave it a 1 out of 5. It was that bad.
I am very curious about this. So you're telling me, and you've probably told me this before, and it just like etch-a-sketched out of my brain because that's how it works during the pandemic. But you rate single issues.
I rate everything that I read. Okay. So like if it's a collected edition, I rate the collected edition as a whole. If I rate a single issue, I rate it as a whole. The system isn't perfect, but that's just how I do things. Like reading a thing is a single unit, right?
Yeah.
So like I read all of Sweet Tooth in like the 3 bound editions, and so I rated those individual bounded editions as single items compared to rating every single issue.
Interesting. So when Goodreads first started having, or I first became aware of them having, who knows if maybe they had it all along, but like single issues of comics on Goodreads so that you could log and rate individual issues. I tried to do that and very quickly gave up because I realized that when I would rate an issue like in the middle of an arc, it might actually turn out to be like a really good arc that I love. There just maybe wasn't as much of the elements that I really enjoyed in that issue, or the issue was very much just the middle of the rising action, so there wasn't any real payoff at the end of the issue or something. Like I stopped doing it for that reason because I felt like I wasn't being fair to it. But I also see lots of people that I'm friends with from our Goodreads group, and Kate Lamphere, one of the podcasters with us, rating them and having no problem. And it's interesting to me how you balance that in your head, because I mean I trust you and Kate both to not like that you're being fair to the books and everything.
Yeah, I mean a lot of it is, I question myself all the time about this, and so this is going to add another layer of anxiety to me rating my own personal like rating system that no one's ever going to see but me. Like, is it just based on my mood? Am I feeling irritable today, and so I gave all of my books lower ratings or something? Yeah. I don't know,
well,
but
subjective.
It is, and that's. But at the same time, I'm just like, I rate things by just putting them in an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't go to Goodreads. It's too cumbersome. There's no good, easy system. Wait.
So you have a giant Excel. I was assuming you were doing this on that that site you told me about with comic books.
Yeah, no, I don't do it on. I mean, I sometimes do it on League of Comic Geeks just to like share my ratings for the week. But no, I do this in an Excel spreadsheet because there's no more easier direct way to just like list my book and the rating next to it with some notes.
My God. So you have an enormous spreadsheet out there with everything you read in comics. Mike, I know we've crowned you before, but I do think this like extra takes the comic nerd crown. That's like next level.
I don't think I'm the only person out here that does this.
Oh, no, I know you're not.
This is a whole other conversation, but like I want to figure out this solution, but in a more consolidated way. It's just like League of Comic Geeks has so many problems with their UI where like just because you hit a rating doesn't mean that you want to do a bunch of other things. Just because you marked something as read doesn't mean you need to want to actually interact with it beyond just marking things. I've got all sorts of problems with things on the internet. I feel like the problem is that so many people approach how they manage and want to handle and organize their comics in so many different ways that there is no one universal way to solve it. But League of Comic Geeks is close. At one point, the old Comixology site had something that was kind of okay, and then they got rid of it.
Yeah,
like the Pull List site had a lot of that stuff that kind of disappeared, way back in the day. I know. So there's this whole bubbling thing in my stomach where I'm like, I should just quit my job and build a comic site that will destroy all the other comic sites.
But then now we're gonna have a mortgage payment, and that really tanks those.
And then the problem is that there's no one who's going to pay for this thing. Yeah. There's no huge value in it because there's not a lot of money in comics, and especially in tech and comics.
Right.
So yeah, whole of the thing, I'd be happy to have that conversation with anybody who wants to. This happens all the time on the Hangouts. So if you're not coming to the Discord Hangouts, get on that. But anyways, let's move on before I get even further into this Pandora's box of cans of worms. Let's talk about comics that we're excited for, comics that we're looking forward to read next. Let's talk about books that are on the top of our pile. And let's start with you, Kate. What's on the top of your pile?
Top of my pile is definitely the Department of Truth, Volume 2, The City Upon a Hill. Writer is James Tynion and artist is Martin Simmons. I read Volume 1 for this week's topic and am super curious where this book goes. I also just love the art in this book and want to check out other books that Martin Simmons has done. I think that is I really enjoyed the premise and the writing is really solid and all of that, but the art was absolutely what took it, the volume 2 to the top of my to read pile, as opposed to the other things I had already checked out on Hoopla. So I'm really jazzed about that, and I am gonna remind you in our discussion that your girl has not read volumes 2 or 3, and if you completely major spoil it, I know where you live, Nick White. I know.
I guess I know what I'm not talking about on the second half of this.
Yeah. Minor spoilers are fine. I don't care. But major plot points would be sad. But that's what's top for me. It helps that it is available immediately on Hoopla, where it was definitely one of those books I enjoyed enough that the minute I finished it, I clicked to see if volume 2 is available and checked it out immediately, though I haven't had a chance to start it yet. But I am very into this, and I am glad that it looks like volume 3 is coming soon or is already here, but not on Hoopla. So hoping to be able to get caught up and everything.
Yeah, the thing about the Department of Truth is that in order for someone to spoil major plot points, they'd have to sit you down for 15 or 20 minutes. So
you think Nick isn't willing to do that?
Okay, all right, that's true. I just Nick, what about you? What's on the top of your pile?
I mean, first off, what an embarrassment of riches coming out this week. So many good things. I'm just going to briefly just throw a couple of these out there and just say why they didn't make the cut. Look, Star Wars Han Solo and Chewbacca #1 is coming out. Why? Do you want another story about Han Solo and Chewbacca in their smuggling days? I don't.
Who knows what they got up to, Nick? I don't, and so therefore, even if I do know, what if there's a story that I don't know? I want to read this.
I can tell you what's going to happen, okay? Because I've read the product description, and I'm a smart guy. Just kidding. And
Kara says the reason why is because he's the sexy one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kara.
They're going on a smuggling mission. The big catch is that Greedo is involved. I know what's going to happen. Mark Guggenheim is going to try to make us feel for the fact that Han Solo eventually kills Greedo. You're not going to make me feel that. That's not going to happen. If this book tries to make me feel bad about the Rhodians' murder in Mos Eisley Cantina on Tatooine in the year of our Lucas 0 BBY, it's not going to happen. Okay. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
I know there's a Jeff Lemire book coming out this week, Little Monsters #1. Jeff Lemire, Dustin Nguyen. I know, everyone buckle in. This book is not my pick for this week. Okay? I love Jeff Lemire. I love Dustin Nguyen. Them doing another coming-of-age book about a kid? But Nick, the kid is a vampire in a post-apocalyptic story about kid vampires in L.A. I don't need a post-apocalyptic narrative. We are minutes to midnight on the doomsday clock. I do not need this right now.
Okay.
Danny says, hello, lost boy. That's exactly my point, Danny. I don't need it. Also, Chillin' in Another World with Level 2 Super Cheat Powers Volume 3 is coming out.
What?
It's
Did you just make this comic up?
It's a manga. Look it up. Chillin' in Another World with Level 2 Super Cheat Powers.
We all knew it was a manga from the title. Come on.
I guess.
I almost picked this because of the title. I knew nothing else about the book. Didn't pick it. Crimson Reign 3 is coming out. Actually kind of excited for that. But my pick for this week is Delicious in Dungeon, Volume 10 by Ryoko Kui. I know. It's a manga. I picked a manga and I tossed Jeff Lemire to the curb.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
We got him.
The time. I feel like you could just put the picture of Obama in the conference room.
Nick, tell us why this is your pick.
Yeah, I mean, look, do you love manga? Do you love cooking? Do you like eating other people's cooking? Do you love D&D or tabletop games? Then you got to be reading Delicious in Dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
End of story.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for this book.
Dude, me too. I'm very mad that you stole this pick out from underneath me. But that's okay, because I'm very excited for that book. I'm very excited for my copy to come in. But the other book that I'm very excited about is one that I have been looking forward to since it was announced like in 2020.
Ooh, okay.
This is Squire by Nadia Shamas and Sarah Alfagi. This is a book that's like fantasy. It's like a YA fantasy about a young girl who wants to become a knight, but she's from a country where she's not allowed to actually enroll in the military. But in order to become like a full-fledged citizen with all the amenities that you would get as like as part of this military, she has to enroll in this college or this they called it a Squire camp, where you have to compete with other people to become the next big knight in this army. And once you do so, you basically become this rich and powerful person. But she is going to find that the greater good that the army that she signed up for is fighting for is maybe rooted in very bad, dangerous things. I tried to sum up a really like complex synopsis here, but this comic looks great. I've seen a lot of Nadia Shamas talking about this. Sarah Alfagi's art is incredible. If you haven't seen her stuff, you should really, really dig in on it. I'll post a link in the show notes as a preview for this book, but this looks incredible. It's right up my alley. YA fantasy stuff that's like in the a little bit older age range is fantastic, and I think this book looks beautiful and fun, and I think these two creators together are an incredible team. And the best part about this is that this is not your standard like European centric fantasy. This seems to be more angled toward like Middle Eastern culture and African culture. So I'm again really excited to see like a different style on this idea of fantasy, knights in armor and kind of stuff, but from a totally different perspective. And these two creators seem very, very solid. So yeah, very much looking forward to this book. The other thing that I should say before we get into second half of this episode, because thank you for calling it out, everybody in the chat. I apologize. We do have two folks hanging out with us in our Discord today who had some picks. Danny is picking Little Monsters #1, and I think he's giving Nick the middle finger in the chat because he didn't pick it.
That's fine.
And Paul G is picking Black Sad, They All Fall Down, a new installment in the Black Sad series, which is very, very exciting as well. So looking forward to both of those. I'm probably going to read both of them, but they were not my pick this week because Squire's coming out. Come on. Anyways, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about comics that constantly have us on Wikipedia trying to figure out what parts are real life, and sometimes we'd be better off knowing whether or not they are the truth. So we will be back in just a second. Hey everyone, just a quick heads up about the second half of this week's episode. We talked a little bit about conspiracy theories and diving down Wikipedia holes, but we also talked about some very serious subjects such as sexual assault, murder, and anxiety. If those things make you uncomfortable, you may want to skip the second half of the episode. Just giving you a heads up, now on to the show. This week on I Read Comic Books, we are talking about comics that constantly have us on Wikipedia trying to figuring out what parts are real and which ones we'd rather know aren't. This is a really interesting topic, if only because it feels like we're just circling back to the idea of horror comics. But at the same time, I think this was kind of inspired off of all three of us, myself, Nick, and Kate, having read Department of Truth and kind of going, oh no, this is a bit too real. And then thinking about that even more. Nick, I know you've got a whole big list. Kate, I do want to get your thoughts on this before we get started, or to get started, I should say. Like, where in comics do you find yourself almost being the most creeped out, where you're like, I don't want to know if this is real or not?
For sure, true crime, and especially I have really enjoyed, but also been like haunted by the true crime memoirs that are by people who had more direct experiences surrounding a serial killer or something like that.
Gotcha. So the fact that I sent you a copy of Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done Eddie Gein done probably was not a good thing.
I
right?
am very excited to read that. I was planning on reading it for this episode, but ran out of time reading other books for this episode. So yes, I am very excited for it. And you also sent me My Friend Dahmer, which is like my most perfect example of this, where it is so good and I love it so much, and it is dark and just scary because it's that whole like you never know who's gonna be that, like that, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the idea of serial killers in general is terrifying, if only because of the the thing that the news I think has done over the past 30 or 40 years, taking the idea of serial killers and saying they could be living in your backyard. It's
your nice neighbor next door. Exactly.
Yeah.
Which sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But like sometimes that was one of the books I read, Becoming Unbecoming, is about the Yorkshire Ripper. And that was 100% where like when he got arrested finally, his neighbors were like, "Oh, but he's so nice." And you were like, "Well, except for when he hammers women to death,
That's how he was able to keep going for as long as I always love that. Oh, he seems so nice. Well, that was kind of how he was able to function. Okay.
Well, Nick, what about you? Where's your head coming at with this episode? Because I know we talked about this kind of a little bit in our chat going into before the episode, and planning and stuff but where are you thinking with things?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of suggested this just because, I think Department of Truth was one book. Certainly there were some other ones, but there are definitely books where I'm just like picking up my phone and I'm like, is this fucking real? Like, is this real? is Hellboy real?
You start with something like a Department of Truth, and then you start to read other comics that day, and you're like, could the Turtles actually be real? Could TMNT actually have happened?
Does a mutated turtle have the manual dexterity to hold a pair of sais? Is that functionally mechanically possible? Am I being lied to?
Right.
Wake up, sheeple. Yeah, so Department of Truth is definitely one for me, and I think part of it was just that I think the funny thing about a book like Department of Truth is that it's almost like a zero-sum game when you come away from reading a book like that, because you're either in a camp where like everything you read in that book is news to you and you're like, oh, I never knew people thought this way about flat earth theory, or people thought this way about, a like airport
false flag actors or something.
The false flag actors or the Denver airport or things like this. And you're like, wow, like this is all like people believe this. This is weird. And like, that's not great, because it probably means you've been living under a rock or in like, the Unabomber's cabin in the woods or whatever. And I know some people are like, Nick, the FBI took that away and it's in a facility. And I know that. Okay. You don't need to tell me. And then you have the opposite camp, which I think is where I start to fall in. And it's an equally disconcerting camp, which is like, yeah, I know about this. Yeah, I know about this. Yeah, I know about this too. These are all very basic theories. And it's like, that's not a good place to be either. Like,
right.
If chances are there are enough people who are like so deeply steeped in this stuff where it's like some of those people are deeply steeped in it because they believe some of these things.
Right.
So, I think the goal is to be somewhere in the middle. And I wish I was.
Well, it's problematic, right? Because I think the idea of stuff, especially when it comes to like conspiracy theories and like the mythos around various, monsters and stuff, you kind of question this idea of like, Loch Ness being like a thing, or Bigfoot being like a thing that everyone kind of knows about. It's like a cryptid or whatever. But like that all becomes old hat when you start to dive down the rabbit hole of like, no, we're going to talk about black-eyed kids. No, we're going to talk about the Men in Black. No, we're going to talk about like all these different things that are pieces of different conspiratorial thought, like that like branch
false flag school shootings. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That all that kind of stuff. And the more you get interested in these types of topics, the more you start to fall down these rabbit holes where eventually you're just like, no, I don't believe any of it, but I definitely am wearing my tinfoil hat to bed. Like, not for any reason, just because, it kind of becomes like you're almost like damning yourself for being interested in the subject. And I know that this is focusing on only one piece of this topic, but I find that like even when we talk about things like the My Friend Dahmer, or Kate, you've got listed in your notes the Green River Killer, like Nick and you and I had read like a Brian Michael Bendis murder book at one point, and it's like the more you start to get into these things, you're kind of just like you start scratching your brain of just like start trying to find these patterns in the real world beyond things. And this episode is just us slowly admitting that we're all like conspiracy theorists, and that's what we do when we're not on the podcast. But yeah, I definitely feel like you can unravel a little bit when you dig too deep into this stuff, which is why it's important to step back and go and read a nice, I almost picked the Kirby manga, like the Nintendo character manga, because it's just supposed to be a nice fluffy story about Kirby. But yeah, I don't know, because like it's weird if you go down these rabbit holes too far, you end up like in a real like sweaty, anxious, head under the blankets with a flashlight pointing at your phone for some reason kind of moment. But I don't know. But because I read things like Junji Ito's books, like the handful of books that I've read of his, and I just get like creeped out by the idea of like shapes in the night and stuff. When like as soon as I go to sleep and wake up the next day, I go, oh yeah, this is not real. There's no way this is real. Even if I Googled it and fell down the SCP hole on Reddit or something, which I can't even do anymore because I'm too much of a scaredy cat. But yeah, it's a whole thing. So I'm just rambling at this point. I don't know. Kate, Nick, please take this away from me.
Yeah, I really like the rabbit holes, honestly. I go on those subreddits. I end up on, now that I'm on TikTok, like terminally on TikTok at this point in my life, I keep getting, my For You page has figured out that I like these things. So it gives me these videos of people essentially reading the things from Reddit, of people's stories that are basically like creepypasta or whatever, of like, I was in the woods alone, and then when I developed my photos, there were photos of me sleeping, like that kind of thing. And I really, really get too into that, in the same way that like I just watched a YouTube thing of like the 15 worst amusement park rides, and that all got shut down, and these horrific disasters that happened with it. I'm like, why is this entertaining? But it is. And I think it's just because I'm broken inside.
Sure.
But like the Department of Truth, I like that they're all like recognizable conspiracy theories to me in volume 1. But I think
just you wait.
Yeah.
So I liked it, but in that way, it didn't make me actually look anything up, because they were all like very prominent ones, right? Sure. And but what I really liked was that concept of the one conspiracy theory to rule them all, because that's very much what QAnon is, where it just kind of absorbs all other conspiracy theories. And Zander and I watched the QAnon docuseries together that was on HBO, and then they just recently more or less have figured out who the two men were that were posing as Q, right, from linguistics analysis and stuff like that. And so I've been very into, like, curious about / horrified by that whole thing. And then that angle on this in the story with the fantastical element of like the whole, if enough people believe it, it becomes true. But is that fantastical? Because at a certain point, yeah, that's exactly how the world works, right?
Well, I mean, Berenstain kind of thing, it's like Mandela effect. But I think that Department of Truth leans more into the idea of like tulpas, right? Where like you're putting belief into a thing that eventually becomes to life.
It's fantastical
Ideation
in
made
that
real.
It's fantastical in the sense that things literally become the literal truth, right? Versus the like becoming unbecoming goes into of like, if you were raped and everyone in the world says no, you weren't, every single other person, then it functionally becomes the world's truth that you weren't, and you get to kind of struggle with that on your own, especially like the author is a child when this happens and already has a kind of shaky grasp on consent and sex in general and all those things. So it's like, then it literally becomes the truth to her and everyone else that this was actually her fault and her choice and all that, right? So I think there is a way in the world that what everyone popularly believes becomes what's real, but not in the obvious sense of like, and then there was this hell demon that we all brought into being, right? So
right.
But the art on that is so good that it sucks me in way more. The way that the color work is done in a way that is both vibrant but also kind of muddy, so that things are often a little unclear. I think works super well with the story. What did you guys think about that?
I never. Are we talking about Becoming Unbecoming?
Oh, because sorry, Department of Truth. Department of Truth.
Oh, okay. On Department of Truth.
Yeah.
I mean, Department of Truth. I mean, I mean, I can't even don't even get me started, because like that book, I think the experimental nature of the book adds to the chaos that makes you uncertain, but also very certain as to what's being shown to you.
Yeah.
And I think if you read other artists' works that have done similar things like this, like they all have a very distinct way of getting information to you that works within their style. And I think Simmons does a great job of using like color work, and like it almost feels like collage work to try to like show things that are real but also extremely wrong when you look at them at the same time. Like I
kept thinking of our friend Paul, who does collages, and being like, this is like if Paul went crazy. Like
well, on top of the illustrative work that also lives inside the story, right? Because there is still a lot of illustration going on. But when he needs to make I am specifically thinking of the issue that's about the woman whose child is, painted as this false flag actor, right? That whole issue is full of tons and tons of different like collage work to try to show the like clear imagery, but also show that it's broken and strange, and it is, as much as you recognize it, it doesn't feel right. Like I took a lot away from that first arc of the series, because it does so much with just the imagery. Like James Tynion will write 10,000 words on a single page also to make the same point, but I think Simmons does a great job with just the art to convey the meaning that you're supposed to be taking away from the moment.
A really good balance between the two of them, I thought, in this book, between the dialogue and what's told to you, because of course it's your character is new to this whole Department of Truth, and so they're using that as a way to like have characters explain what it is and what's going on and all that stuff to him, and thus to you. But I thought there was a good balance between that and the art explaining things. It reminded me a lot of the art in Witches, in the way that the kind of seen but not seen becomes part of the unsettled feeling, so that it puts you in the same kind of shoes as the main character.
Well, that's the thing that really gets me about a lot of this horror stuff in this kind of vein, right? Like Witches, some of Junji Ito's work, it was two of the things that I was thinking of, like this idea of shapes beyond your vision, that like you look into a dark area and you can't be certain if there's something there or not, or someone there.
Yes.
And to me, that is some of the most unsettling stuff that you can see, if only because it maybe is the most relatable.
Yeah.
And this is where like when we're talking about diving down Wikipedia holes in regards to that, I always approach it from the mindset of like, well, if you're seeing shapes off in the distance, is that a thing? Is that some sort of psychosis? Is that some sort of like something wrong with your eyes? Do I have cataracts all of a sudden? Like, have I developed cataracts in the last 5 minutes? Like things that don't make any sense.
I mean,
but like anxiety brain just wants you to dive into these problems and things. And this is where I'm like staring down at my phone, and because I'm looking at a bright screen and I look back up into the darkness, everything's extra dark, and then it freaks me out even more. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, I mean, there is
I'm
just
gonna have to put a trigger warning for this whole episode, for the record, just because.
A normal optical illusion that just humans' brains do, of making, because we try and assign patterns and meaning to things that even normal you'll see, the clothes hanging on the hanger and it looks like a person, right? The shadow in the dark kind of thing. And so, but like, that's normal. But especially when people get really overtired, like you've been up for 24, 48 hours straight, it's normal to start seeing like shapes and shadows in the corner of your eye that disappear when you turn your head. That's a thing that becomes really frightening if you have bad insomnia and have been up longer. And often those will look like kind of shadow people. And that's probably the origin of that whole conspiracy theory thing. It's also a thing that happens, obviously, when people are more anxious and more aware of their surroundings. They'll end up with their brain is being even more vigilant. But I've definitely had, in my struggles with insomnia like a decade plus ago, where I was up long enough that I'd start getting the like things in my corner of my eye, and then they're gone when you turn your head, and was freaked out that I was going crazy. And my doctor's like, no, you're just really tired. That's what happens. And I was like, okay, what a weird thing for the brain to do when you're tired. But, okay, whatever you say.
Yeah. And again, people are, they make fiction based off of this as like a way to process it. And I think it's important in a way to read stories like this for some people to understand the perspective of like where these ideas may come from. And it's weird because it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy cycle of like, well, I didn't think about this thing until I read this book, and now I'm thinking about it, and therefore now I think it's happening. And it can be kind of bizarre that way. But I also think there's value in like reading that to process it, to understand it better, so that you can at least recognize that, oh, it's not just something that's happening to you, it's an understood thing that happens to more people, and therefore it is not actually like an isolated incident kind of thing.
I really like the part in Department of Truth where they're explaining like why like what is the psychological motivation for people believing in and propagating these conspiracy theories about like the whole wanting the world to make sense in a way that makes them special, and the victor or hero or whatever wanting things to kind of all line up in the right way, and then they kind of do like that. Was really interesting to me, and I would love more of that. I hope that they keep going with that.
Yeah, I think the Bigfoot arc kind of gets at that a little. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is right around the corner, I think.
I ended up not Googling the conspiracy theories in Department of Truth Volume 1, but still like going down a rabbit hole related to that stuff about the disappearances in the national parks, and like the comparison of like where people were last
hell no,
seen.
Don't get into that.
Where people were last seen and mapped onto where the underground caves are for the national park systems, and how they're like very, very similar to one another. And it's probably that people are just wandering into caves thinking they can wander out, and it's not working, right? Like, turns out that's really hard. But still, then when you go down that rabbit hole, then you get into the weirder and weirder things that people think are causing it. Like there's doorways opening up, and then people go into another dimension, and you're like, sure.
If only Narnia was real.
Yeah. And there's the Bigfoots out in the Appalachia, and they get those people, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure they just get lost. But yeah, it's interesting. What did you guys read?
Nick, you've got a whole list. Let's dig into some of your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a less tonally dark, direction, there are definitely certain works where there's a real, I guess historical fiction would be the right genre, but there's a real blurring of real events with some fictional events superimposed on them, or in the case of Alan Moore's From Hell, you actually have Moore attempting to take years and years of real research on Moore's part to attempt to construct a narrative that sort of explains all of Jack the Ripper / Spring-Heeled Jack, or whatever name you want to assign to that whole set of Ripper murders in London. And something like that is really fascinating, especially because you do have this kind of melding between the two. And in some works, Moore's work, I think especially in later releases of it and republishing reprints of it, you have a more detailed sort of blow by blow of how Moore constructed it, and sort of like the background information is all there. So if you kind of want to see how he pieced it together, you can do that, which is helpful. You see the same thing with Backdurf's works, whether we're talking about Kent State or whether we're talking about My Friend Dahmer, right? Where you have and to Backdurf's credit, his sort of footnote sections are actually quite readable and actually very interesting, which is also very helpful because you don't need to be Googling Jeffrey Dahmer, both from your internet service provider's perspective and your own well-being perspective.
They already know I'm weird. It's okay.
You just don't need to be doing that. And so, Backdurf is providing a real service there. But it's always sort of fascinating to see how these things come together, and even not just in sort of horror works or conspiracy theory oriented works, but with something like even Vinland Saga, which I was reading last night, which is about like 10th century Europe, 10th century Scandinavia, about obviously Vikings. With something like that, I'm just going straight to Wikipedia and being like, how much is this actually derived from like real Viking tales? And are these characters composite characters or based on real individuals and things like that? And I always enjoy those works more than the ones where you read like a comic or like a historical fiction book and you can tell that somebody like really wants to show that they've done their work and they're just like dropping in years all over the place, and it's like, oh, it's this character and this character, and they're trying to depict a historical narrative, you know, blow for blow. And it's like, I get that you did your work and it's clear that you've researched this, but this also isn't fun. This also is not fun to read, and you're, you know, 6 degrees of separation away from being a college textbook. And you know, a footnote section exists for a reason, and please use it.
That was one thing I really liked about Becoming Unbecoming, which is the writer and artist is a woman who just goes by Una. And not to be confused with my cat, Una, they do spell it differently. They spell it UNA. But
wouldn't want to get your cat confused
with this actual
don't
person.
want your
professional author.
False author attributions. Yeah,
right. Exactly. So, I mean, she is a very talented girl, but she is way too lazy to ever write a book. So, she is sleeping right now, right next to me. So, anyway. This one is about her growing up from like ages like 10 to 16 during the time when the Yorkshire Ripper murders were happening in England and right in her area. And I really liked how she includes like quotes from news coverage at the time all throughout the book to help talk about the way to illustrate the ways in which people were talking about this case, because it was so deeply wrapped up in the like sexism of the time, where the case would have been solved almost immediately if the police had been willing to listen to a teenage girl that was one of the first victims who lived and was able to describe in detail the man that did it. And they didn't believe her because they were so stuck on the theory that he was killing just prostitutes. And the way that it was discussed in the media and by the police was all about like women. It wasn't, you know, innocent women. It was, you know, those women who were doing bad things, the sin, like this and that, right? And so when they kept having survivors come forward or other cases that had lots of clues, but they were discounting them because they were people who weren't prostitutes, then it took them 20 years instead of like a year. And they also, that meant that every time a new victim happened, they dug into the woman's past trying to figure out what made her bad. You know what I mean? Like, so it became character assassination on purpose of these women to illustrate like, oh, what was she doing that she must be, you know, doing unsavory things and not be a strong moral character that he picked her. And it turned out had nothing to do with prostitutes. There were so many more victims than they knew, because it was just him killing women. But it was the public, and everyone was so clung to the idea because it meant that you could be safe, right? Like if you're a good woman, this isn't going to happen to you.
Right.
And so this all happens in the context of her growing up and experiencing multiple sexual assaults as a child between, you know, 10 and 16, and then being blamed for it and really ostracized as being called like a slut by her peers, right? So she's like, oh, I'm one of the dirty bad women. That means I'm going to be a victim. And so all of this is like kind of goes back and forth between how she was treated after her, and heard or not heard is really the thing, after her much less headline grabbing crime, the very day-to-day crime of a young woman being assaulted, especially like more than 30% of rapes of women are in girls that age. So going between that and then comparing that to the context of that case of this man who's hammering and stabbing women to death. I mean, it is brutal. And how those are basically, one is an exaggerated form of the other, and how society really responded to both in the same way. And in the same way, it made it so that men went free and justice isn't served. And it was just a really well done. I will say the art isn't anything exciting. It gets the story across. What's really interesting is the narrative and how she looks at all this, but they also include a bunch of footnotes with more information about the different cases so that she doesn't get bogged down, like Nick was saying, like super bogged down in all the details of the different victims and the way that the investigation went wrong. And it went wrong in a ton of ways, and all that. So it was I thought really cool, and I really like the footnotes aspect of it, and definitely flagged a couple of like the books and documentaries on the topic that are in the like there's also like an end like further reading section that I thought were really cool.
Gotcha.
Excited to look at. It's on Hoopla. I mean, I'll just say it's on Hoopla.
I was gonna say, and I mean, this to me in itself, just the book and its footnotes, and I think that Durf does this, and I think like Box Brown has also done this in his work, like gives you enough to say like, hey, if you want to continue reading down this thing, there is way more that I was not able to cover in this book, which I think is really interesting. And like, you know, we say going down Wikipedia holes to make sure that things are all right, but also it's going down Wikipedia holes to also educate yourself, right?
I was going to say, for me, it's usually to get more information.
Right. Well, yeah, I had another weird set of books that I was thinking of for this that are kind of bizarre and like very far removed from everything else that we've talked about.
Okay.
Like there's a book called Pink that I read, and a book called Helter Skelter by an author named Kyoko Okazaki. Jeez, oh Pete's. Where they're kind of based on no one particular thing so much as an amalgamation of different style, like people's lives in like high society in weird ways, about like one woman who's so desperate to change the way that she looks in her whole history and past that she goes far out of her way to different countries to get surgeries and to like pay people to get rid of information about her and to eliminate like actual human beings who may have known her before she became this new person.
Whoa.
That kind of stuff really makes me kind of like scratch my head and think like, I know that this is fiction. I know that this is based on nothing directly, but also this type of stuff is kind of real. Like the extremely elite and rich and powerful in this world, like to an extent can have this sort of level, like to the point where, you know, there are some celebrities even who like no one truly knows their original name. No one truly knows like how old they are, you know? And I only say this because a friend of mine used to work for a company that was owned by the Daily Mail. Like she worked there a long time ago. And she was telling this story last night. And I don't want to perpetuate any gossip, so I won't say who they were talking about. But they were like trying to call their old school and like the old place where supposedly their hometown was to try to like get a date as to what year they graduated from high school. And they were like, well, we know like that someone of that name went to this school, but we can't verify if it's this celebrity or not. And they spent like an entire like 2 days, I think, working on this, trying to figure out just the actual age and hometown of this actress. And they couldn't. And no one, I mean, like if you do a little bit of Googling, you can maybe figure out how I'm talking about. But still, it's like these types of things are real. And in my mind, I'm just like, I need to go down a Wikipedia hole and figure out if this person is actually, we don't know how old they are. We don't know where they're actually from. They just kind of came out of nowhere. And now they're this big, massive celebrity that if I told you guys the name, you all go, oh, I know exactly who that is. So yeah, another reason I don't want to say it is because like, I don't want to perpetuate celebrity gossip like
Pauly
that,
Shore.
you know? Nick, I told you that in confidence.
Sorry.
But anyways, no, but it's reading books like Pink or Helter Skelter where you get these like extremely strange slice of life type stories. Maybe less so Helter Skelter. I think this is more Pink, where like there are these like supposedly like, I don't know, like very popular celebrities where they've just totally curated every aspect of who they are and how they present themselves to the world, as well as to the people that they interact with on like a daily basis and even have relationships with, is kind of fascinating to me because it kind of scratches an itch in my brain of like, do people actually do this? And, you know, like, have I ever met someone that's actually done that? Or like, it kind of gets me into this whole thing, looking up stories of people who have like drastically changed their entire life, just to present a certain image to other people. And to me, that's like so much work, but also extremely fascinating that someone would go so far to do that, not for any nefarious purpose other than to say, I want to have this perfect image of myself and present it to other people. You know, whether you consider that nefarious or not, you know, I'll let you guys decide that yourselves. But yeah, those two books really got to me because they have some extremely like just interesting twists and turns that like I don't think everybody would enjoy those books, but I really found them to be fascinating for that reason. So yeah, I took a little bit of a left turn on this topic. It's not just all murders and conspiracy theories.
Well, I mean, what you're kind of presenting is sort of the inversion of the topic in a way. It's sort of not so much the ability to go up and get on the internet and find the supplementary information, but more so just the inverse of realizing that information doesn't exist, right? That there's an absence of it, and in what you're describing, sort of a deliberate and calculated attempt to, reshape or remove that information. So that's
right.
That's interesting.
I mean, it still circles back to the Department of Truth thing of like ideas and people shaping the world, to their image. But it's kind of a different aspect because it's not like a big global conspiracy so much as it's a personal conspiracy about a single person, But yeah, I don't know. Did you guys have any last thoughts? Any other books that we didn't mention that you guys want to bring up before we wrap up here real quick?
I mean, like any Hellboy book, any Hellboy adjacent book just basically has me on Google constantly. And they're like, oh, did you know about this like priest in the 16th century that like walled himself off in this church or whatever? And I'm like, is this fucking real? Is this Mike Mignola? Is this real? Is this real? Did this really happen? Or any time where like the Nazis get involved and they're like, did you know the Nazis were trying to revive blah blah blah? And I'm like, well, that's probably true. That one is like,
that one I believe. That one I believe.
Like anytime they're like, oh, they were like trying to resurrect Rasputin or things like that, and I'm like, probably true. So any of that stuff, anything in BPRD, anything in like, Witchfinder, definitely. But then also like Hickman stuff, same thing. Anything involving like Manhattan Projects or
oh boy. Yeah.
Like that's like definitely Googling all the time.
Yeah. The historical type stuff gets me too.
But then even like Brubaker Phillips stuff where you've got like a historical backdrop on things where it's not as front and center or Hickman, it's not like Hickman-esque where you're like, oh gosh, like is this true like fringe theory about World War II an actual thing? But just the fact that Brubaker and Phillips set their stories in these different backdrops, like 1940s Hollywood, like the story that I can't think of the title of, with the screenwriter. Again, still can't think of that. Or
me either.
Or Reckless, where you've got these 70s and 80s backdrops about MK Ultra and the Weathermen and things like that. Which is even more compelling to me because in these books, these sorts of conspiracy theory-esque threads aren't really always that front and center. It's just kind of lingering there, and you're like, oh, I wonder if that's, I want to learn more about that.
The Fade Out was the book you were thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. This is an interesting conversation, I'll say. I appreciate you guys bringing it to me, and now I will be even more scared of the dark, and also questioning if people are watching Kate's search history, because I worry now. Now I'm worried.
This is where we put in our NordVPN plug because
the truth is out there, Mike.
Right? Yeah. Oh yeah. This is our NordVPN sponsorship, guys.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, I appreciate you guys bringing. Like I said, this is a really interesting topic, and you've given me at least a couple of books that I should check out just to get the adrenaline pumping. Anyways, we're going to wrap up here. Next week's episode is going to be me, Tia, and Paul celebrating 30 years of Image Comics by discussing how Image has impacted our experiences in reading comics. I think, I'd be really curious to know what everybody else thinks, how they've been affected by Image. So if you've got anything, send us an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com or send us a voicemail. We can play it on the episode. Be really interested to hear what folks think because it's the 30th anniversary of Image Comics, and we're not going to talk about that stupid annotated cover comic that came out for $8. I can't believe they charged money for that. But anyways, you can follow us all on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rapin. And you can follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. You can join today for exclusive series access to things like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show. 5 stars would be fantastic, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, because we deserve it.
You can also join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. There's a link to our Discord link in the show notes. Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth, so why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about IRCB?
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music, and we can't thank them enough. Zander is a very cool guy who makes us sound cool every single week, and he edits the show. I want to say thank you to Kate and Nick for this episode. I want to say thank you to Danny and Paul and Kara and Tom and everybody hanging out with us in the Discord chat today. You fantastic human beings are just fantastic. And I want to say thank you to everybody out there who listens to the show. You are all wonderful people. Thank you so much for supporting us. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.